Is music theory pointless? Aren't there 1,000 great musicians who know almost zero music theory? Why does theory even exist? Is music theory even politically correct? Is theory just a bunch of made up stuff to make people look smart? I see these questions all the time in the comments and all over YouTube. And the thing is, actually, they have a point. You know, there are some really successful musicians like Hans Zimmer, who says that he had almost no formal music education. And then you have Jacob Collier saying,
"F the rules."
So the big question is, do we actually need music theory? And if so, what kind of theory is actually worth learning, and how much of it do we really need to learn? So before we answer this question, we need to understand what actually is music theory and what is the big problem or big danger with music theory. So music theory is basically a set of systems or concepts designed to help us understand or convey musical ideas. Let me unpack that. So music theory is designed to help us understand or explain how music works. We might have a piece of music that we love listening to, and music theory is what will help us break it down and understand what's going on in that piece of music. But the important thing to understand is that music theory was typically created after the music. Music theory has almost always been designed to understand music that already exists. So, you know, somebody would say, this music is amazing, or this music is extremely beautiful. I want to figure out how it works. And in order to figure out how it works, they have to develop some kind of theory. Let me give you an example. So Joseph Haydn used to write hundreds of pieces of music which followed a certain structure. This structure didn't actually have a name, it was just this cool thing that Haydn was doing. And at some point, somebody must have said, I really like what he's doing here. What actually is he doing? And so that person must have sat down and figured out what Haydn is doing. And he came up with this theory that we call sonata form. When Haydn was composing that music, the words sonata form didn't exist. There was no such thing as sonata form theory. Somebody came up with sonata form afterwards to help explain what was going on in that music. Here's another example. Imagine you have a bunch of monks singing in a cathedral, and someone says, we need to write this down so that other cathedrals can sing it just the same way that we do. But the trouble is, there's no accurate way of writing music down. And so these monks had to come up with a system of writing down the music that they were already singing. And that's how our Western system of written music was born. It's just a system to write and read the music that we were already performing. And of course, over time, that system has developed to meet our musical needs. But that's all that music theory is. It's a set of systems for understanding or conveying musical ideas. And here's maybe the most important point. This is one of the two big problems with music theory, and that is all systems have limitations. Yes, music theory has limitations. Let me show you how. So let's take our Western system of written music, the one that we've been using for centuries. This system has limitations because it limits us to only using 12 semitones in an octave. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and then we're back at the octave again. That's only 12 semitones. So in the Western scale, the distance between this note, lu, and this note, lu, is 4 semitones. Lu, 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 lu. But why can't there be 5 notes between lu and lu? You know, lu, 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 lu. Or what about 6 notes? Lu, 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 lu. Or 7 notes? Lu, 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 lu. Or even more. There are dozens of possible gradations between one note and the next. So splitting the octave into 12 semitones seems somewhat arbitrary. In fact, in different cultures, parts of India, Indonesia, Burma, and many others, they actually do split their octaves up very differently. So our Western system of splitting up an octave into 12 equal semitones is just that, a system. And it's not perfect, it has limitations. So why do we do it then? Why bother even creating music theory if it has these limitations? Well, because it's convenient. Yes, it has limitations, but it's also an extremely good system for capturing musical ideas. I can capture my ideas and then somebody else, after a little bit of training, can read them and they can perform them. That's why this system has stuck around, because it works very well for most of our musical needs, even if it's not perfect. So the key word here is theory. We never say musical laws. It's not like there are these unbreakable laws of the universe. It's theory. It's just one possible system of of understanding music. So now I want to talk to you about the different areas of music theory and why you should or shouldn't learn them. And for the sake of this video, I'm going to focus on the most common questions, the most common areas of music theory. First, learning to read or write music. Do you need it? Is it really necessary? There have been tons of successful musicians who haven't been able to read music. Jimi Hendrix, Eric Clapton, the Beatles, Eddie Van Halen. And yes, those are all pop musicians or rock musicians, but even Hans Zimmer claims to have a very limited knowledge of reading and writing music. So, okay, let's say you are a composer or a performer. Maybe you play piano or guitar or something, and you are able to convey your ideas successfully. If you can capture them somehow with a recording device or a MIDI keyboard or something, then there's actually no need to learn to read and write music. Because if your job is simply to capture or perform ideas, then you can do that by whatever means necessary. Traditional music theory is just one of many systems for understanding, capturing, and reading musical ideas. But you should use whatever system is most helpful for you. However, there are some situations where learning to read or write music are absolutely vital. For example, if you're a classical performer, say a singer or a violinist or something, then being a fast reader is absolutely essential. I've had so many cases where I've had to sub for ensembles at the very last minute, and you turn up and you literally have 1 hour's rehearsal and then you're performing. So there is no time in that situation for learning the music. You just need to turn up and read it. And it's the same with a lot of orchestras, even film orchestras. A lot of the recordings of film music you've listened to, take Star Wars, they probably recorded that music the same morning that they first looked at it. They turn up, they read it, and they record it. There's no time for learning the music. So if you're going to be a performer at that level, you need to be able to read extremely fast, or you'll probably be laughed out of the audition room. And the other situation where reading or writing is crucial is if you're a traditional composer, or if you're writing music that is going to be played by singers or orchestras. So this is a harsh story, but I remember sitting in auditions for something, and a master's level composing student turned up. She was studying classical composing at a master's level, but she was really hopeless at reading music. And the professor at this university said to her, "Don't write what you can't read. You shouldn't write anything that you can't read." Now, maybe that was a little harsh, but there is some truth there, I think. If you're going to be writing more advanced music for singers or instrumentalists, you should probably be able to read what you're writing. You should really be able to hear in your head the lines that you write. And yes, Hans Zimmer says that he doesn't read music, and that may be true, but I can absolutely guarantee that he has a team of orchestrators who are extremely proficient with music theory, who can read and write to a very high level, and they're the ones who are making sure that everything going to the orchestra is perfectly written. Also, as a little bonus, by the way, when you learn to read music to a higher level, that's when you can begin studying scores, studying great music of the past. That's when you can pick up a Beethoven symphony or a Mahler symphony or a John Williams film score, and you can read it and actually understand it. And as a student of music, that to me is pretty cool. So the second common question is about learning relative pitch. Should I learn it? By the way, relative pitch is different from perfect pitch. Perfect pitch is when you can wake up at 5 in the morning and you can hear a police siren and you can say, that's a B flat. It's when you can identify notes immediately just by hearing them. And if you haven't developed perfect pitch by the age of about 6, then I'm sorry, but you probably never will. Relative pitch is different. Relative pitch is where you understand the relationships between one note and every other note in the music. It's where you understand the relationships between all the notes. Hence the word relative for how the notes are related to each other. So if I say, that's a D, now what's this note? You would immediately be able to say, well, that's a B because it's a major sixth and an octave above the D. Once you have a point of reference, say this D, then you'd be able to identify any other note that you hear based on that point of reference. That's what relative pitch is. I would highly recommend that anyone serious about music develops their relative pitch. It's an incredibly useful skill to be able to hear any note and understand how it relates to any other note. It will help with your sight reading, with your ability to play something by ear, with your composing, with your mental processing of music. It's just an incredibly useful skill. If there are any dangers or reasons not to learn relative pitch, they're so minute that they're almost not worth mentioning. You could argue that relative pitch is a Western-centric system of musical thought. It's very European-centric. It doesn't take into account Indonesia or Burma or Africa or other musical cultures. But, that's true. But I would say that for the vast majority of people, mastering your relative pitch will massively improve your musicianship. And in general, general, training your ear to a high level is probably one of the best things you can do for yourself, whatever kind of musician you are. Having highly trained ears will give you a massive advantage with just about anything you can do in music. And also, if you're ever going to direct music, or conduct music, or be just a key part of the ensemble, you need to be able to hear everything that's going on. I have had a few small experiences where I've been directed by people who can't hear which notes were wrong or which parts were wrong, and of course no offense to them because everyone's learning how to do this, but if you are the director, we are relying on you. We need you to be able to say that G sharp was a little flat, or tenors, that should be a B natural, not a B flat. If you can't hear exactly which notes need correcting, then you might not be ready for that position, unless you're trying to actually learn that skill, in which case that's okay. We all have to learn it somehow. But if that's the case, then make sure that you do actively work on that skill, because you need it if you want to be a great director. So that's a really important skill to learn. Ear training, probably the most important skill, whatever kind of music you want to pursue. So the third thing that a lot of people get confused about is what I call the Western rules of music. Learning the theory of Western harmony, Western counterpoint, Western orchestration, and so on. There's so much theory, so many rules. How much do I actually need? A lot of the time, these rules are based on music of the past. So for example, a lot of the rules we learn about Western harmony are based on the music of J.S. Bach. That music is hundreds of years old. And of course, we've updated harmony teaching since then, but the foundations of teaching are still based on the music of J.S. Bach. And in the same way, when we teach Western counterpoint, it tends to be based on the music of Palestrina. We wrote these rules to understand the music of Palestrina. And sure, that music is very beautiful, but it's also hundreds of years old. Another one is the idea of parallel fifths. This is one that so many people are obsessed with. There's this musical rule that says you shouldn't write parallel fifths. At university, your teacher will sometimes mark you down if you do this. But Debussy uses parallel fifths all the time. So who is right? Should I just not bother learning these rules? So here's the thing. The trouble is, when people learn these ideas, so many people think that it is law. They think, oh, that's how it's done, so this is how I have to do it. So instead, I'm going to give you a different model to think about all this stuff. On the one hand, there is a reason why these rules exist. Bach and Palestrina's music had a very pure, beautiful, and sometimes very emotional sound. And we can learn a lot from how they did it. There is a reason why people say no parallel fifths. Because if you avoid parallel fifths, it means that the voices in your music will have more independence. They won't just be following each other up and up and down and down. They'll have more independence. They'll be more interesting. They won't get stale and boring. So there is a reason why these so-called rules exist. It helps us to understand how these different styles of music work. And when we learn it, it also helps us to inform our musical decisions. However, the big danger is that these old systems and rules might be too strong an influence on how we think about music or how we compose music. So instead of writing what you really want to write, you might think parallel fifths are bad, I mustn't write them. Or you hear something and you say that doesn't follow good sonata form practice, or I can't draw a Schenkerian graph from that or something, this must be bad music. That is literally what you see people do, and it's such a shame. And in the same way, actually, you could absolutely argue that most theory has imposed limitations on future composers. So look, when we write music on the piano, we only have access to 12 notes in each octave. What if I want access to more notes than those 12? I can't, because a few centuries ago, some dude decided to limit it to 12 notes per octave. Now, look, you can write a lot of amazing music with these 12 notes, but it's still worth realizing that it is a limitation of Western music theory. But once you learn that it's a limitation, you can break free. That is the point. Once you learn the theory, then you can break free. But only once you understand why that theory exists in the first place and what its limitations are. When Jacob Collier says, "F the rules," you need to also remember that his mother is an extremely successful music professor, and he went to one of the best high schools in the country for music, and then he studied at one of the best conservatoires in the world for music. And then, once he's been through all that education, all that study, then he can say, "F the rules." Once you learn and understand these rules, then you can transcend them. So when you're learning theory, understand that none of this is law, but it can absolutely help you to understand and appreciate music. And this is what it's about, knowing enough theory to actually make informed decisions about music, to actually be informed about music, knowing enough to be able to approach music with a whole arsenal of tools at your disposal. Music theory will inform and educate you, and you should absolutely learn it for that reason. But you should never think of music as a sacred law. So So here's my key points. If you really want to become a musician, then don't just be lazy and abandon theory, because there are just too many advantages to actually studying theory. And yes, Hans Zimmer didn't have a formal music education, so he says, but I can guarantee that he is a master of sampling and synths and writing music to film. He has mastered his craft, even if it's not the traditional music route. He wasn't lazy, so don't be lazy. Choose the theory that will help with your goals and then get to work. Nothing will give your musicianship so many advantages as working on these things. Anyway, leave a comment for me. Let me know which of these skills you think you need to work on. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.